brain needs to be able to localize the source of the stimulation. Knowing the modality is all well and good, but if you don't know where that's coming from, the brain will have a difficult time interpreting the significance of that information. So there's a number of ways where localization is accomplished. And we will first take a look at the somatosensory cortex, which is responsible for integrating information from incoming somatic senses, from your nociceptors, your tactile receptors, etc. The somatosensory information is detected by what we call a first-order neuron, and then that first-order neuron sends information to a second-order neuron, which sends information to a third-order neuron. The ultimate destination is the somatosensory cortex found in the brain. This is in the cerebral cortex. In fact, if we pop up here and take a quick look, you actually can see here this area that is in blue. This is my somatosensory cortex right here. Okay, and it's found on both sides. So left and right brain would both have this somatosensory cortex, and they're essentially mirror images of each other. It's here that the sensory information is sent. And so if you were to have that cut on your index finger, for example, that information would be processed and sent through the spinal cord, through the thalamus, and into the somatosensory cortex. Okay. We zoom in on that somatosensory cortex. What we actually see, this would only be half of the brain, but we can see here what we've got is a region. This region is kind of just highlighted a little bit, colored in a little bit. This outer portion is actually gray matter, and gray matter is composed of cell bodies and dendrites. The white matter is toward the inner regions of the brain, and it contains the myelinated axons of these neurons. As the information is received, so here's my example of my finger that's been cut. It would be sent in through these afferent pathways, and ultimately it's going to arrive in a very specific region of the brain that is dedicated specifically to processing information that comes from the index finger. Now we'll look a little bit further on at neuronal tracts and how these sensory tracts, how they work. But for right now, I want you to know that the left side of the body is processed by the right side of the brain and vice versa. So if this is somebody, I'm guessing it's their left hand, we would be looking at the right side of the brain. Now, this little funky dude on the top here is what we call a humunculus. The humunculus was drawn to represent the real estate that is dedicated to certain portions of the body. In the somatosensory cortex, you're going to notice that the hand has a humongous amount of real estate, especially when we compare it to things like our elbow, our poor elbow, and even our trunk, our knee, right? These areas have lesser areas devoted to them. This makes sense. You kind of already know, or you should already know if you think about it, that we use our hands to interact with the world quite often. There's a lot of sensory receptors in there, a lot of tactile receptors, and we, if we're interested in something, we're going to pick it up, we're going to see how heavy it is, we're going to see if it's smooth or rough, whether it's got sharp edges, whether it's fuzzy, whether it's silky. And we do all of this with the sensory neurons that are found in our hand. So much information is sent to our brain from our hand. In addition, you'll notice the large area that is devoted to the face. We use our faces also to interact with the world, especially lips. We kiss, we talk, of course. We use our tongue. Okay, if you think about infants, as they develop, these infants, what do? As they're learning about their world, their eyes aren't as developed when they're first born. They take some time to develop before they can really start to process that visual information. But their tactile senses are very developed, and so they're going to touch, they're going to grab your hair, they're going to yank on it, they're going to pick something up, they're going to put it in their mouth, and they're exploring their world with these very sensory neuron rich regions of the body. Now, one reason for the sensory information is of course to detect things that feel cool, but we also use that sensory information to provide feedback to our skeletal muscles. And so if you think about the fine control that you can do with your hands, and you kind of wiggle your fingers and you move them around, the sensory information, the proprioception, remember from those muscle spindles, proprioception is going to be sending information constantly to your brain regarding how tight your muscles are, which muscles are contracting, and what's going on, so that your brain can make mild adjustments to them as we go. The face is the same thing. We use our face to interact with our world. We have facial expressions, very animated faces, and again, we're constantly sending sensory information to the motor regions of our brain so that our motor regions can adjust, and so that we can be certain that we are scowling or laughing or frowning or smiling, and we can generate the facial expression that we want to generate that relates to our situation. And so we've got that sensory information. Now, I do want to remind you that a lot of the somatosensory information actually doesn't make it into conscious perception. Quite a lot of it is processed. In fact, only about 1% of it, remember, is actually consciously perceived. I before E, except after C, right? Perceived. Well, that's really ugly. Anyway, only about 1% of it is consciously perceived. The rest of it would be beneath the conscious level. And much of the somatosensory information is actually processed by regions in the brain, such as the medulla oblongata, the pons. The hippocampus is not the brainstem, but it's in the brain there, and it also is responsible for processing a lot of information that is sent to the hippocampus, so that the hippocampus and other regions of these brains can help regulate homeostasis. We don't know what our blood pressure is at any given moment, but you can be guaranteed that it's being monitored by appropriate centers in our brain so that our heart rate and our blood pressure is controlled.